And joining me now is Congressman Krishnamoorthi, an Illinois Democrat who sits on the Intelligence and Oversight Committees. And I appreciate your time, Congressman. So, you know, the look on the face of some of the prosecutors today, as described by our Evan Perez, who was in the room, was astonished. This is not what they expected, this sentence that's just under 4 years. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it was on the low side for sure. The sentencing guidelines are much higher. And, you know, the judge said a couple curious things, one of which he said that the defendant, in this case, Mr. Manafort, had led an otherwise blameless life. I just didn't understand what he was talking about. This gentleman, Mr. Manafort, is facing 2 sentencing hearings in 1 week. I don't see how someone who led an otherwise blameless life would end up in this type of situation.
Why do you think the judge did this? I mean, obviously he's been critical of Mueller in the past, right? He had accused prosecutors at the beginning of this of, you know, basically using Manafort as a pawn to get to the president, to try to impeach him or whatever, was the quote from Judge Ellis at the time. And, of course, now making a point of saying this is not about collusion. Was the judge trying to send a message?
I'm not sure, but, you know, I think that in this particular case, you know, Mr. Manafort didn't even express remorse for his crime. So I'm surprised at the sentence. I'm also very curious about what his lawyer meant at the end when he said that there was no collusion with, quote unquote, any Russian official. And this was a bookend to a statement that the White House made earlier in the day when they said that they weren't taking any pardons off the table for Mr. Manafort. So this kind of call and response was a rather curious signal to various people.
I mean, look, there's a couple ways to look at it. One way is, okay, this is a chairman of a presidential campaign for a now sitting president who is going to prison. For defrauding taxpayers of millions of dollars, for bank fraud. I mean, it's stunning. But then on the other hand, there's this sentence that is, in so many ways, a mere slap on the wrist. From a political standpoint, is this a win for Trump?
Unclear. There's going to be a second sentencing hearing, which is next week, and that could involve a sentence of up to 10 years. Just one fact that I would just point out about that particular hearing. There was a filing that was made in January that inadvertently revealed that Mr. Manafort had actually met with a business associate who was connected to the Russian intelligence services. And apparently in that meeting, in a cigar bar in New York City, he actually passed, in part, private polling data from the Trump campaign to this Russian intelligence agent, essentially. And apparently that agent, in return, asked for relief from sanctions on Russia. And so that is the clearest evidence of collusion or conspiracy in this whole Russian saga. And so I think depending on what happens next week and what happens with that particular piece of information in the investigation, that could spell more difficulties for the president.
And what about for Manafort? I mean, if you're saying that's the closest to conspiracy, which obviously would be the legal term for, you know, for collusion, the crime, could there be more coming?
Possibly. I don't know that the special counsel is going to continue to prosecute Mr. Manafort beyond this stage. It sounds like he may be done with Mr. Manafort. However, we don't know where the special counsel is going to go with that very important meeting between Kilimnik and Mr. Manafort, and what other information he has, such as, for instance, who directed Mr. Manafort to go to that cigar bar and exchange polling data. You know, you don't have to be, David Axelrod to know that that private polling data is being given for a reason. And that reason is potentially targeting by the Russians in their social media campaign or their efforts to influence the American election.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman. I appreciate your time today.